Right. So, hello to all of you. We are ready to start our second lecture on the digital economy and future of work lecture series. I am Sandhani Senaratna. I will be taking up this chapter for you. So, on our first chapter, we have discussed about the digital economy, right? Certain concepts surrounding digital economy, digital economics, right? The most commonly used terminologies associated with the digital economy, the evolution, and also how towards the end we talked about concepts of how demonopolization has been enabled in certain industries attached to a digital economy. So today's chapter is going to explore the fundamentals of digital economy, right? So when it comes to understanding the fundamentals of digital economy, and if someone asks, why should we learn about the fundamentals of digital economy? It is because now we are very familiar with the concept of industrial economy, right? We are very, very familiar with the industrial economy. What do you mean by the industrial economy? It is where the economy that we have usually heard of, that we are very familiar with in classroom discussions, what we have been taught most of our lives, the economy involving the physical goods and also services, right? But when it comes to the digital economy, the context is somewhat different. So that is why you need to have an understanding about what are the fundamentals that are governing, or let's say the fundamentals on which the digital economy is being built, right? So today we are hoping to explore on this concept. So this particular chapter is a bit lengthy and it will be conducted in two sections, right? So today we will be starting the first section of this lecture, right? So first of all, let's have a look at what sort of things we hope to cover at the end of the lecture. So we intend to provide definitions for digital goods and digital services. And also we are going to look at the concepts of zero marginal cost, commoditization, and bundling. So these concepts you may have already heard within the industrial economy settings as well. You may have learned these things in your economic, maybe microeconomy, maybe macroeconomy modules as well, right? So we are going to look at these concepts from a digital economy point of view, right? Then we are going to understand the public good features of digital services, understand the concepts of in-house production, commons-based peer production, and crowdsourcing, right? Then we are going to introduce to you concepts of value chain. You may have already perhaps heard the concepts of value chain. Then we are going to talk about value shops and also value networks, right? Then we are going to look at multi-sided platforms and how these can be exploited within a within digital businesses, within a digital economy, right? And also we are going to understand the positive, negative, direct and indirect network effects in a digital economy. In a digital economy, the word networking is very prominent, right? So network effects are being created within these economies, and also how these network effects may take sometimes a positive path, sometimes a negative trajectory, and how it has direct and indirect effects, right? Then we are also going to understand the concepts of positive feedback, lock-in, switching costs, right? Just like I mentioned earlier, you may have already heard these concepts in your industrial economy knowledge. You may be familiar with these concepts, but let's look at how these things come into operation in a digital economy. And also we are going to understand how mergers and acquisitions occur in a digital economy, right? So as you can see, most of these concepts are already things that are familiar to you in the usual setting. But like I mentioned several times, we are going to look at these concepts from a digital perspective or digital economy point of view, right? So let's start off first by understanding what is the concept of digital goods and services, right? So it is a well-known fact that in a digital economy, right, the foundation or the building blocks for a digital economy are laid via digital goods and services, right? So that is why the first point says that they are the building blocks of a digital economy, right? So everything within a digital economy, they can be uh, just like in an industrial economy where goods and services are exchanged, right? So within a digital economy also, the production, the circulation, the trading, and the usage of digital services is what we talk about, right? So how do we define a digital good? A digital good, it has been provided on the slide as a networked, zero marginal cost virtual object that has value for individuals or organizations. Now, when you look at this definition, you can break it down to several important points which hint you certain features of digital goods themselves. Right? ඔයාලා මේ definition එක පොඩ්ඩක් break down කරලා බලුවොත් digital good එකක තියෙන features කීපයක්ම මේ definition එක හරහා ඔයාලට අඳුනා ගන්න පුළුවන්. Right? For example, it is said that a digital good is networked, right? So some sort of networking, that means it hints that some sort of networking has to be in place if it's a digital good, right? And there is a zero marginal cost. Zero marginal cost. So this is something very unique and inherent to digital economy, unlike in an industrial economy, right? So we talk about the zero marginal cost in the coming slides. And also a digital good is also identified as a virtual object. A virtual object, right? You may have sometimes heard of some terms such as virtual markets, right? What do you mean by virtual markets? Where there is no physical existence in a virtual market. There is no physical, place as such. So the same way, a virtual object, can you physically like touch it? No, it's not tangible or not something that you can physically see also, right? Then it has value for individuals or organizations, right? Just by merely being a virtual object, right? Just by merely being networked or having a zero marginal cost, it doesn't automatically become a digital good. It also has to create or impose some sort of value for a person, right? A consumer like you and me, or in a corporate level, it has to have some value. Now, for example, if I, let's say the example of a e-newspaper, or let's say an example of an e-book, right? So I have value when I read that book, when I read that newspaper. I have a value when I download a music track on a some sort of music providing site, right? So likewise, it has to have some value for the consumer, right? For individuals. Right. So with this definition, let's try to, point out some features of digital goods, right? So in the definition, it was clear that virtual object, that a digital good is also referred to as a virtual object, right? Can you remember? A network, zero marginal cost, virtual object. So that means we can look at properties of a virtual object ideally when we are trying to look at features of a digital good, right? So it says a virtual object can be replicated without any incurred costs. That means the marginal production cost of the object is zero, right? අපිට අපි කියනවා පිරිවැයක් දැරීමෙන් තොරව, right? පිරිවැයක් දැරීමකින් තොරව මේ digital good එකක් replicate කරන්න, copy කරන්න, තවත් unit එකක් හදන්න පුළුවන් digital good එකක, right? So අපිට ආන්තික පිරිවැය, ඒ වෙනුවෙන් වැය වෙන ආන්තික පිරිවැය අපි කියනවා zero. So in reality, it's not exactly that it is, completely zero or like that. There are some certain costs involved in it, right? But those costs are very, minute, or let's say very inconsiderate, not that material so that we can consider that it's almost zero. The marginal cost is almost zero because that cost incurred is very much little. I will explain it to you more when we move ahead to zero marginal cost section in this particular lecture, right? In the forthcoming slides. Then the second property, it is tangible but can be stored as data on a digital media, right? It is intangible, right? It is intangible. That means අපිට ස්පර්ශ කරන්න බෑ. But it can be stored as data. අපිට දත්ත මාධ්‍යයෙන් ඒක ගබඩා කරන්න පුළුවන් on a digital medium. මොන වගේ මාධ්‍යකද? Like a consumer's hard disk, a smartphone, in the cloud, any other storage devices, right? Any other portable storage devices that you use, right? On any such, digital device, right? Or even on the cloud, right? Now, for example, you may be working when you're working from home or when you're working on assignments with your friends, you may be accessing the cloud. You may be uploading some files to your Google Drive, right? You may be placing your files there and everybody may be accessing those files in the common shared folder, everyone working on the assignment or on the office project. So essentially there you're working on a cloud, right? So then the third property, deliverable to consumers over a communication network such as the internet. So these digital goods, in other words, if I say a virtual object, it can be delivered to consumers via some sort of a communication medium like the internet. That means if we go back to the definition, that is why we say a digital good is a networked zero marginal cost virtual object. So this is where the network aspect of a digital good comes into play, right? As a property. That means කොහොමද මේක network වෙන්නේ digital good එක ජාලගත වෙන්නේ කොහොමද අපි ඒක consume කරන්නේ අන්තර්ජාලය හරහා නේ එතකොට ඒ communication network එවැනි communication network එකක් හරහා අපි මේක access කරන නිසා තමයි අපි කියන්නේ මේක networked කියලා. Then a virtual object must have financial, psychological or other value for someone. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes it may have a financial value or maybe a psychological value, right? Or even some other sort of value for a consumer. If you're trading, if you are familiar with the concept of Bitcoin, right? So those the trading of Bitcoins has become a very much popular and also fast-pacing investment in the present, right? So in such instances, there may be financial value, there may be financial benefit for the users. Like I mentioned earlier, the consumption of a book or something is different. It's not a financial value, but it has a value for me, for the consumer. So likewise, different sort of values could be attached to these kinds of virtual objects, right? Then some few examples we have provided to you to point out digital goods. So there can be many, right? There are so many digital goods that you also, I'm sure, may be able to point out. So here we have listed out a few. Since everybody is familiar with the Microsoft package, so Microsoft Word document, a music track on Spotify, doesn't need to be on Spotify. It can be on any other such application, right? Then any web page that you find on the internet, application on the iPhone, on your even on your Android or whatever the phone that you're using, right? Whether it's a Samsung or Apple or whatever the brand is, you have access to apps. So all those things. Then Wikipedia articles, right? Emails, data stored on bank accounts, electronic bank accounts. Then your personal data or private data stored on Dropbox accounts, right? So like we talked about the Google Drive, Dropbox also provides a storage space, a virtual storage space for you. If you're familiar with Outlook and all that, maybe some of you are using Dropbox as a cloud storage medium, right? Just like someone of you might be using the Google Drive, or some of you may be using OneDrive, right? So all your data stored in these kinds of places, it is a digital good, right? Then if we go to Airbnb, not only Airbnb in Sri Lanka, if we take, not only in the international context, right? Wherever you are, even in the local context, even if we take, let's say, Ikman.lk, even if we take booking.com, right? So the listings on these kinds of pages, these are digital goods, right? So I hope you have a good understanding about what a digital good is and how you can define it and what are the examples for a digital good, right? So let's move forward. Now, coming to digital services. Now, we talked about digital goods. What about digital services? How can we define a digital service? A digital service is a networked, zero marginal cost service. You can observe a similarity there, no? It is also networked, also having a zero marginal cost, but it is a service. And also, once again, has value for individuals or organizations. So pretty similar to that of digital goods. So services are also intangible by nature, digital services, right? Now, in the first chapter, we talked that to refer both digital goods and services, we use a single term within the lecture series, right? But to distinguish to you between the two concepts, today I'm going to break down the concept of digital goods and services to you, right? So now we talked a lot about digital goods. So what are the examples of digital services in that case? So examples of digital services, a few we have given here. Can be social media, right? Can be your Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, right? Then electronic banking services are there. Then internet access. If you are into gaming, so gaming facilities, multiplayer online gaming. Then web browsing, email, all these are services. So can you distinguish between the nature of digital goods and digital services? Now here we talked about social media, talked about electronic banking, not anything listed in a, or not anything stored in a electronic account. We refer to it as electronic banking, right? Then if we compare between digital goods and services, right? Sometimes you may find that it could be a little difficult for you to clearly distinguish or clearly separate from the two. So that's why the next point says the difference between a digital good and a digital service is somewhat blurry. Sometimes it may not be clearly distinguishable. Now, for example, consider your Facebook account. So the data on the Facebook is digital goods, while the usage of the Facebook application is a digital service, right? So that is how you distinguish between the two. So you can think of other ways how you can interpret, how you can distinguish between these digital goods and services by referring to these examples even, right? How for example, if we take electronic banking, what are the digital goods associated with the service? Digital service, electronic banking. What can be the digital good associated with the digital service of online gaming? Likewise, give it a thought and see, then it will be more clearer to you how you can distinguish between the two, right? So moving forward, now this is important. In the definition of digital services also, we talk about network access, right? Network access is paramount. So what do we simply refer to as network services? The transmission of data over fixed and mobile networks, right? The transmission of data over fixed and mobile networks. So this network access is important for the delivery of digital services as well as data storage and data processing. So network access, data storage, and data processing, all three of these are very important when we come to the concept of digital services. Why? Because these enable the delivery of other technologies, of other digital goods, right? Api network access haraha, data storage haraha, data processing කියන මේවා ඔක්කොම එකතු වෙලා තමයි digital services වල definition එක හැදෙන්නේ. right? එතකොට මේවා මේ network transmission, access, data storing, data processing මේවා digital services වෙන අතරම, right? මේවා අපිට digital services කියලා හඳුන ගන්න පුළුවන් වන අතරම ඒවා තවත් digital goods සහ තවත් digital services මිනිසුන්ට සමීප කරවීම සඳහා, users ලට සමීප කරවීම සඳහා, එහෙම නැත්නම් ඒ digital goods and services වලින් යම්කිසි usage එකක් අපිට ලබා ගැනීම සඳහා උපකාරී වෙනවා. Right? So that is why we say, while these concepts of network access, data storage, and data processing are also recognized as digital services, they also become enablers, or they also become facilitators that deliver other digital goods and digital services to users, to different people, which makes them enabling technologies. Enabling technologies or foundational technologies. We refer to them as foundational technologies also. Right? So I hope you can identify the difference between digital goods and digital services now. So let's look at a few differences that we can pinpoint. Now, physical products, obviously, they have a we are going to look at the difference of digital goods and services from physical products now, right? We are going to pinpoint the difference between digital goods and services which are operating in a digital economy from physical products that we usually observe in an industrial economy, right? So physical products, they have a physical presence in the real world, in the physical world, physical domain. Then digital goods, on the other hand, they are built up by something else. They're built up by bits. Sometimes if you have learned database management in your second year, or if you have come across the subject of database management at some point, you may have heard how data is organized, right? How the file system is being organized, right? In a database system. So there you may have learned sometimes that the smallest unit is a bit, right? There are bits, there are bytes, and then, it goes on. There are kilobytes, there are megabytes, gigabytes, likewise, it goes on, right? So the smallest unit of data we recognize as a bit. So this data is created by these bits, right? So the digital goods are built up by sequences of bits, and also they exist as parts or pieces of software, or else pieces of data that are stored on various kinds of storage devices, right? Like we mentioned earlier, it can be a cloud, can be any other portable storage device, it can be on your laptop, on your personal computer, on your mobile phone, right? So there's one difference. And then the second one, digital goods and services may be combined to form a larger and more complex digital goods and services. What does that mean? Digital goods and services can be combined together. They can be put together in order to create or form more complex, larger digital goods and services prior to them being offered to consumers. Right? So this nature creates an ecosystem of its own. Right? අපි digital goods and services කීපයක් combine කරලා තවත් ඊටත් වඩා විශාල, ඊටත් වඩා සංකීර්ණ digital goods and services නිර්මාණය කරන්න අපිට පුළුවන්. මේ හේතුව නිසා මේ digital goods and services සියල්ලම එකතු වෙලා අපි කියනවා ecosystem එකක් හැදෙනවා ඒගොල්ලොන්ගෙම කියලා. Right? For example, here we have provided usage of smartphones as authentication tokens for secure access to bank accounts, right? What does that mean? Now, when you're using a smartphone, then ඔගොල්ලෝ මේක කරනවා ඇතිනේ authentication tokens ඔයගලන්ට එනවනේ නේද? ෆෝන් එකට authentication එකක් එන්නේ සමහර වෙලාවට ඔයගලගේ account එකට access කරන්න යනකොට හෝ ඒ වගේ දෙයකදී නේද මොකක් හරි transaction එකක් කරන්න යද්දි when you're trying to process the transaction, you are prompted for a authentication, a smartphone authentication most of the time, right? In order to provide a secure, safe access to your bank account, or in order to proceed a bank transaction sometimes. So here there are several parties coming together, several services coming together. What are they? Yes, if you just take a minute to think about it. Let's say there is a primary service provider, for instance, right? There's a primary service provider, which is the bank. It can be commercial bank or Sampat bank, right? Likewise, there's a service provider where a digital service is being provided. Then there is the authentication provider, right? That may be your mobile operator, the mobile operator that you are connected to. And also, there is a clearinghouse involved, right? So this clearinghouse is the party which guarantees the security of your transaction or the validity of the authentication process, right? So the services provided by the goods and services provided by these three parties converge together or combine together in delivering the mobile phone or smartphone authentication system in a bank when you're accessing your bank account, right? But yeah, so this kind of property we don't usually observe in a industrial economy, right? Then also another special feature that distinguishes digital goods and services from industrial economy's goods and services is that they do not degrade as a function of time. That means simply digital goods and services, they do not degrade, right? Now, physical goods in an industrial market, they usually degrade over time, right? අපි කාලාන්තරයක් තිස්සේ පාවිච්චි කරොත් යම් කිසි භාණ්ඩයක් අපි කියනවා ඒක ගෙවීමකට ලක් වෙනවා නැත්නම් අපි ෂෙයා වීමකට ලක් වෙනවා, right? They degrade over time. But in digital goods and services, we don't observe that. We don't observe that, right? That means they will continue to exist into the future. They will continue to exist in their same quality in which they were created. There is no deterioration because they are digital in nature. Now, don't confuse this with software or things getting obsolete and outdated and things like that. We are not talking about that here, right? අපි දැන් software එකක් හරි මොකක් හරි create කරන quality එක තියෙනවනේ. ඒ quality එක as it is එහෙමම පැවතෙනවා කාලයත් එක්කමනේ. degrade වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ වගේ දෙයක්, right? So likewise, that is also a special feature which distinguishes digital goods and services. Then another special feature that is observed in digital goods and services in comparison to industrial market goods, they can be, that means digital goods and services can be sometimes offered for free for the consumers, right? For the consumption part, you don't charge anything. Now here we have given some examples, for instance, where paid services in industrial markets, right, are competing with these most of the time free applications or digital goods and services in a digital economy. What are the examples? WhatsApp versus SMS. Now for SMS, you have to pay a fee for each SMS, right? And also, when it comes to the WhatsApp, right? When it comes to WhatsApp, maybe for connecting to the app and all that, you incur some sort of, expend data. But let's say to send messages and all, the then all messages යවන ගානට ඔයාලට charge වෙන්නේ නැහැනේ WhatsApp එකේ නේ. So this is different from the previously charged platform of SMS, right? If we take a more clearer example where you can clearly distinguish digital goods and services and physical goods, right? Online news versus traditional newspapers, right? So online news versus traditional newspapers. To buy a traditional newspaper, you have to pay a fee, definitely. But online news, not so, right? Then if you have, let's say, subscribed to some sort of news facility and such, that it's different. But let's think a situation where you can freely access news by just simply clicking the website of a particular newspaper or a Facebook page of a particular newspaper, or even YouTube channel of some sort of a channel, right? So online news is available to you. The only thing you expend there is the maybe there is some data consumption, there is electricity consumption, but essentially to obtain that service, you don't have to pay a fee for the service provider, just like you do in the traditional setting, right? So there might be some certain exceptions, but in a general sense, right? අපි ගත්තොත් බහුතරයක් වෙලාවට services තියෙනවා. ගොඩක් වෙලාවට digital goods and services ගත්තාම freely available කරන්න පුළුවන් consumers ලට නැත්නම් users ලට, right? So I hope now you can distinguish between digital goods and services and also pinpoint some inherent features to each of them, right? Then I told you that let's talk about this feature called zero marginal cost, which is unique to a digital economy, right? මොකද්ද මේ zero marginal cost කියලා කියන්නේ? So in the traditional economic studies also, you have been taught the concept of marginal cost. ආන්තික පිරිවැය කියලා හඳුන්වනවා නේ? So let's see what it means in a digital economy. Key characteristic of digital services is that they have zero marginal cost. What does that mean? Marginal cost is the cost of producing one additional unit of the service. අපි ලබා දෙන සේවය, අපි provide කරන සේවයේ එක් additional unit එකක් produce කිරීම සඳහා අපිට වැය වෙන පිරිවැය අපි ආන්තික පිරිවැය කියලා හඳුන්වනවානේ. භාණ්ඩ වෙන්න පුළුවන්, සේවා වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒකේ තවත් එක් unit එකක්, තවත් ඒකකයක් නිපදවීම සඳහා අපිට වැය වෙන පිරිවැය. The digital services can be multiplied with no additional cost. So in a digital market, the digital services that we learned about a while ago, they can be replicated or they can be, copied into several copies or multiplied without additional cost. An example of this is the cost of producing one additional copy of an app. The මොකක් හරි app එකක, මොකක් හරි application එකක additional copy එකක් හදන්න අපි ඒ වෙනුවෙන් අමතර පිරිවැයක් දරන්නේ නැහැනේ. එක copy එකක්, copy 100ක් හැදුවොත් අපි අමතර පිරිවැයක් අපි ඒ වෙනුවෙන් දරන්නේ නැහැ. But like I mentioned earlier, there can be some sort of cost associated with this kind of operations. For instance, you are using electricity to connect your device, right? To maybe charge your device and to connect to this service. And also there is a data consumption. You are connecting to a communication network. So there are operational expenses associated. However, in the practical scenario, these types of costs are very much negligible, right? අපි service එකක් ලබා ගන්න අපිට වැය වෙන data වලට වැය වෙන පිරිවැය අපි service එකේ nature එකත් එක්ක බැලුවම ගොඩක් වෙලාවට නොසලකා හැරිය හැකි මට්ටමක තියෙන පිරිවැයක්. ඒ නිසා අපි කියනවා therefore we say these kinds of costs, they don't have a measurable influence on the economics of this particular operation. They don't significantly influence the economics of this operation, right? That means we say it results in zero marginal cost for all practical purposes. ඒ නිසා අපි ප්‍රායෝගික තත්ත්වයකදී කියනවා ආන්තික පිරිවැය අපේ ශූන්‍යයි කියලා digital market එකක් ඇතුළත digital goods and services වැඩි දුරටත් නිපදවාගෙන යෑමේදී මේ එක් එකකයක් වැඩි දුර නිපදවීමට ඒ නිසා අපි කියනවා ආන්තික පිරිවැය ශූන්‍යයි කියලා අපි කියනවා. Right? So even if at the point of origin, there is some sort of electricity consumption, data consumption involved, even to make copies, there might be some sort of these costs involved, but it is very much negligible. Then we cannot forget that digital services, they often have very high fixed cost. Although the marginal cost is zero in a digital good, we cannot forget the fact that they incur high costs at the initial point of creation, right? Since some of them are very much expensive to develop, build and operate. For example, think of let's think of a software, right? Let's think of a game, right? So some of you might be into gaming, right? Gaming කරන අය දන්නවා. දැන් මේ game එකක් produce කරන්න, let's think of Sony's famous game, what is Grand Theft Auto, right? So for Grand Theft Auto, some of you may have even played it sometime back. It was released in early 2000s, 2013 wage, right? So it has been mentioned that the cost to develop this game, right, has been 265 million American dollars, right? So likewise, even though we say that the marginal cost is almost zero, right? Or the marginal cost is zero, we cannot forget the fact that they have very high fixed cost attached to them, right? So to develop, in order to build them and in order to operate these things, there will still be a cost involved, right? Then the development of software may cost millions of US dollars, like I mentioned earlier, require the development teams with hundreds of people. Now if we take a game like Grand Theft Auto, there is a huge development team put together, right, working for years and years to get the game right, and take several years from idea to finished product, right? So there are huge lengthy projects with the involvement of many people and a high fixed cost involved. Then the third point says, since the marginal cost is zero in a digital economy, the cost advantages of increased production continue to benefit digital companies, apparently with no limits, right? අපේ ආන්තික පිරිවැය ශූන්‍ය නිසා, බිඳුවයි කියලා අපි සලකන නිසා, in a digital economy, the cost advantages of increased production greatly benefit the companies with no limits actually. අපිට මේ marginal cost of production කියන එක ශූන්‍ය කරගන්න පුළුවන් නිසා ඒ හරහා අපිට ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන් වාසි digital economy එකක වැඩ කරන firms වලට ලබාගත හැකි වාසි ඉතාමත් විශාලයි කියලා කියනවා. සීමාන්තික මට්ටමේ වාසි ලබා ගැනීමේ හැකියාවක් තියෙනවා කියලා අපි සලකනවා. Right? So I hope it is clear to you. Right. Sorry about the interruption there. So let's continue our discussion. Now we are moving on to public good features of digital services. Public good features of digital services. Now you may have already heard of the concept of public goods, right, in economics. So in a digital economy, how can goods become public goods? And what are the features inherent to the public goods that we can observe in these digital services, right? So the first point says, goods and services in general can be classified as either private goods, public goods, club goods, or common pool resources. So this is one way of classifying goods and services. You may have learned these things in economics, so I'm not going to exaggerate on the features of each of these things. So what you need to know is that this classification of goods and services, it depends on whether a certain good or service is rival, non-rival, excludable, or non-excludable in nature. Right? අපි මේ classification එකට බලපාන්නේ මොකක්ද? මේ කියන භාණ්ඩය හෝ සේවාව අපි කියනවා rival goods, non-rival, excludable, non-excludable කියන මේ නිර්ණායක මත පදනම් වෙලා තමයි අපි goods and services මේ විදිහට classify කරන්නේ, වර්ගීකරණය කරන්නේ. Right? So a good or service is classified as rival. අපි rival good එකක් කියන්නේ මොන ලක්ෂණයක් තියෙනවා නම්ද? If it is reduced in quantity after consumption, or if the usage of the good or service prevents others from using it. Right? That means when you are consuming some sort of a good or service, right? If it reduces in quantity after you consume it, or after you consume it, if it reduces other people's chances of using it, if it prevents other people from using it, that kind of a good or service we refer to as a rival good or service, right? So moving ahead, then what is a non-rival good or service? It is the complete opposite of the rival goods or service. Sorry. So what is a non-rival good or service? It is neither reduced by consumption, nor does the usage of the good or service prevent others from using it. Right? It does not, the quantity or the amount of the good or service, right? The magnitude of it does not reduce with consumption. And also it does not prevent any other person from using this good if someone else is using it. On the other hand, an excludable good or service, it makes it possible to prevent consumers from accessing or using the good. Right? Excludable good එකක් කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? It is possible for such goods to prevent consumers from accessing or using the good. Right? අපිට යම් prevention එකක්, යම් සීමාවක්, යම් limit එකක් පැනවීමේ හැකියාව තියෙනවා. ඒ භාණ්ඩය හෝ සේවාව භාවිතා කිරීමට හෝ ඒකට ප්‍රවේශ වීමට තියෙන හැකියාව නැවැත්වීමට හැකියාවක් තියෙනවා. Excludable good එකක් නම්. Non-excludable good is such that consumers cannot be prevented from accessing or using the good. Right? So if a consumer cannot be limited, if he or she cannot be restrained for using a particular good or service, we call that kind of good or service non-excludable. Right? So what you have to note here is that digital services that we are talking about, they are non-rival in nature. Right? Non-rival by nature. Non-rival කියලා අපි කිව්වේ මොකක්ද? අපි එක් පුද්ගලයෙක් consume කරනකොට ඒ consume කිරීම නිසා භාණ්ඩයේ ප්‍රමාණය අඩුවීමක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. quantity wise හෝ ඒ භාණ්ඩයේ ප්‍රමාණය අඩුවීමක් වෙනස් වීමක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ වගේම ඒක වෙනත් පුද්ගලයෙක්ගේ භාවිතයට සීමාවක් පැනවෙන්නේ නැහැ. So So digital services are like that. So it does not, curtail the consumption of another user. It does not reduce the quantity available for other users of the same digital service. Right. Sorry about this semicolon here. Please correct it. Please cut off the colon that I have mistakenly put here, right? In the word the on the fourth point, right? So physical product එකක් ගත්තොත් එහෙම දැන් උදාහරණයක් දෙන්නකො සරලම ice cream එකක් කියලා ගන්නකො නේද? ඔයා ice cream එක කනවා නම් ඒ ice cream එකේ ප්‍රමාණය අඩු වෙනවා එන්න නේ, right? So the same ice cream, so if we compare it, right, in a digital service, right? දැන් පොතක් කියවනවා කියලා හිතන්න නැත්නම් library එකක ඔයා පොතක් කියවනවා. අපි හිතමුකෝ limited resources තියෙන කියලා. මොකක් හරි unique පොතක්. හරි? ඒ පොතෙන් එක copy එකයි library එකේ තියෙන්නේ. ඔයා ඒ පොත අරගෙන කියවනකොට තව කෙනෙක්ට ඒක කියවන්න තියෙන හැකියාව නැති වෙනවා. Right? But if we take a digital service, let's take a freely available book, right? Let's take an e-book. It cannot limit the consumption of another person because there can be many copies of that book available. And also in some cases there are books that are online available. Anyone can access and read them online. Just because someone else is reading the book online, right? Another person's usage is not limited, right? So here another example is provided, a user reading a web page. Now when someone is reading a web page, does it limit another person to use that web page? No. එක පුද්ගලයෙක් web page එකක් කියවුවා කියලා ඒ තුලින් තවත් කෙනෙක් ඒ web page එක කියවීමට තියෙන හැකියාව සීමා වෙන්නේ නැහැ නේ. So likewise you can try to identify where digital services can be classified. Now if you let's look at a figure explaining about this classification better in the coming slides. Now digital service we understood non-rival කියලා අපි ඉගෙන ගත්තා. And what about excludability and non-excludability? So digital services can either be excludable or non-excludable, right? So excludable means access to the good or service can be regulated, like we learned earlier. On the other hand, if it's non-excludable, a user cannot be denied access to the service, that we learned earlier. No? Now, digital services that are widespread on the internet are non-excludable. For example, we have provided some example, right, for non-excludable digital services and also for excludable digital services. So first, let's look at non-excludable digital services. So we can take free music, news, content on free web pages. They are non-excludable, right? If we take excludable digital services, such as access to specific magazines and journals, that means අපි හිතමු උදාහරණයකට දැන් ඔයගොල්ලන් රිසර්ච් එක කරනවානේ නේද? පොත් එක. එතකොට සමහර ජර්නල්ස් තියෙනවා ඔයගොල්ලන්ට ඇක්සස් කරන්න බෑ නේ. සමහර ආටිකල්ස් තියෙනවා ඔයගොල්ලන්ට ඩවුන්ලෝඩ් කරගන්න දෙන්නේ නැහැ. සබ්ස්ක්‍රිප්ෂන් ෆී එකක් පේ කරන්න දෙන්නේ නැතුව. That means your consumption is excluded, right? Then copyrighted music and movies. Some music cannot be downloaded without paying. Same with the movies and also softwares, right? So that's why we say digital services, we cannot say it's 100% non-excludable. Both excludable and non-excludable features are there, right? Then figure 2.2 shows examples of digital services classified according to the type of good. Now we talked about 4 different types of goods. Let's see how these digital services can be exemplified via a diagram. So another thing that you have to notice is if a digital good or service is both non-rival and non-excludable. Non-rival කියලා අපි කිව්වේ මොකද්ද? Can you remember? Non-rival is the opposite of a rival good, where it is good. It is neither reduced by consumption, nor does the usage of the good or service prevent others from using it. එතකොට මෙන්න මේ වගේ non-rival good එකක් නම් සහ non-excludable good එකක් නම් අපි එහෙම goods වලට කියනවා public goods or services කියලා. Right? What are the two factors to satisfy? It has to be non-rival and non-excludable. Right? So if we look at this particular slide. Now here you can see those goods that we talked about at the beginning of the chapter, right? There are public goods, there are private goods, there are common pool resources, there are club goods, right? So how are we taking this classification? Based on the rival or non-rival nature, excludable, non-excludable nature. So see here, all these things that have been listed here are digital services, right? Digital services. Can you notice that all of these have been classified under non-rival category, right? Non-rival category, but they are both classified under excludable and non-excludable category, right? Now, good examples for public goods are Gmail, Wikipedia, right? So you don't have to pay anything for accessing this, right? Freely available for anyone. Just because you send an email, it doesn't limit the capacity of another person to send an email, right? And also there is Wikipedia, publicly available. But if we take something like Spotify, you cannot 100% freely access it, no? Sometimes your access is limited, where to download some music tracks, for instance, you have to pay some amount of fee. So that means consumption can be excludable in some instances, right? Internet access is also like that. If we take services like Netflix, obviously you have to pay a fee. Now there are instances where people with an account are, sharing their passwords and their usernames and the login credentials with other people, and other people are also, we say, parasites, no, on Netflix, who are depending on the people who bought the account and who are paying the subscription fee. But that's a different story. In order to legally obtain the service, you have to pay the subscription fee, right? Then the World of Warcraft game like that is definitely excludable, right? So these are a few examples that we can show you to show the distinction between these different types of goods and services. You also can think and see where some goods and services that you can that comes to your mind can be classified in this graph, right? So let's move forward. Excuse me. So now we are coming to a new subtopic, digital commodities. Digital commodities. So what are digital commodities? මේ digital commodities අපි කියනවා සාමාන්‍යයෙන් commoditization, commodities කියලා අපි economics වලත් ඔයාලා ඉගෙනගෙන ඇති, right? So digital commodities කියන්නේ, let's look at the first point. Commoditization is the process by which digital services or any good or service in general end up being indistinguishable from a consumer's point of view. අපි පාරිභෝගිකයෙකුගේ පරිභෝජනය කරන්නෙකුගේ දෘෂ්ටිකෝණයෙන් බැලුවම, right? මොකක් හරි භාණ්ඩයක් හෝ සේවාවක් වෙන් කරලා පැහැදිලිව අඳුනා ගන්න බැරි නම්, indistinguishable නම්, අපි ඒවට කියනවා commodities කියලා, right? Commoditization කියන්නේ මෙන්න මෙහෙම digital services, එහෙම නැත්නම් digital goods ඒ භාවිතා කරන අයට පැහැදිලිව හඳුනාගත නොහැකි ආකාරයේ මට්ටමකට පත් වෙනවාට, right? අපි කියනවා commoditization කියලා. පැහැදිලිව වෙන් කරලා හඳුනා ගන්න බෑ. වෙනස්කම් හඳුනා ගන්න බෑ, right? සමානව තමයි පේන්නේ. ඔක්කොම භාණ්ඩ භාණ්ඩ හා සේවා අපි ගත්තම සමානව පේනවා නම්, right? The only distinguishing factor for a commoditized digital service is its price, right? එතකොට අපි කියනවා අපිට digital service එකක් පැහැදිලිව වෙන් කරලා හඳුනා ගන්න පුළුවන් තියෙන එකම සාධකය තමයි මිල කියනවා. මිල මගෙන් යම් වෙනස්කම් සිද්ධ වෙන වෙනස්කම් හැරුණකොට බොහෝ විට අපි කියනවා මේවා commodities කියන ගණයට අයිති වෙනවා කියලා. Right? So figure 2.3 exemplifies commoditization process in which three providers produce competing digital services that were initially different. So if we look at the next figure, right, the next figure right here, digital commodities are indicated, and here three different service providers are there, right? They provide the three digital services named A, B, and C, right? However, from the consumer's point of view, he or she views all these three products as one, as having very slight differences, very small differences, right? They do not distinguish a big difference in these three products, right? So this process is called commoditization, right? This process is called commoditization. So can you take a while to think about what can be examples for such commodities? What can be examples for digital commodities in particular? Yes, so we have included some few examples in this slide. So we have to also note that several, not all the digital services and goods are being commoditized, right? Hammer digital service එකක්ම 100% commoditized කියලා අපිට කියන්න බෑ, right? So we can give examples of several digital commodities here. Internet access, right? Transport of bits, no matter what the service provider is, there is very almost no difference, right? Whoever the service provider. The storage of data, right? Let's take cloud facilities, for example. If you're using Dropbox or you're using, I don't know, OneDrive, you're using Google Drive, right? So if you compare between these things, do you really see a difference, right? And the processing of data, sometimes international news bulletins, or let's say news bulletins, right? News bulletins වල ගොඩක් වෙලාවට අපි commoditization දකින්නේ, ගොඩක් වෙලාවට අපි ලොකු differences දකින්නේ නැහැ. ඒ වගේ presentation එකේ වෙන්න පුළුවන්, ඒ වගේ content වල වෙනස්කම් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. That's a different story, but the value that we get out of that service, right, is almost the same. No matter who the provider is, you don't get special added benefits, or you don't see any vast differences in the way how that service is provided, right? It is not, I'm telling you once again, this is not 100% applicable to all situations, right? In general, but we can see these kinds of observations, right? In general, these types of things can be identified as digital commodities. And also up to a certain level, some types of software products, such as word editing software, right? Now, for example, Microsoft word editing software, if we compare that with another word editing software, right, or a spreadsheet software, right? So the functionality, the usability, the use is almost the same. You cannot find clear-cut, huge differences between what these softwares do, right? So likewise, take a moment to think what other digital services around you are commodities. Or commodity එකක් වෙලා තියෙනවා කියන්නේ you won't mind switching, right? You won't see a huge difference. in commodities or ලොකු වෙනස්කම් දකින්න නැති නිසා ඔය switch වෙන්න බයත් නැහැ ඒ වගේ products අතරින්, right? Because it doesn't give any, you know, special unique difference to you when you look at them. All they are almost the same, right? So the only difference, like we mentioned, is the difference on price. But in a digital economy, another special issue that they are facing is prices tend to get pushed down, right? Prices tend to get pushed down vastly because of this, you know, existence of less and less differences. These prices tend to get pushed down, and also the marginal cost is also, we talk that it is zero, and sometimes in the long run it could become a problem to organizations operating in these kinds of economies, right? In terms of earning revenue, right? Earning satisfactory revenue, right? So moving on. Another feature that we can see in a digital economy is with reference to transaction cost. ගනුදෙනු පිරිවැය. දැන් මේ ගනුදෙනු පිරිවැය digital economy එකක විශේෂයෙන් අවධානය යොමු වෙන්න ඕනේ පැත්තක්, right? Transaction cost එහෙම නැත්නම් ගනුදෙනු පිරිවැය. So what do we mean by the transaction cost? Transaction costs are the cost of making any economic trade when participating in the markets, right? අපි යම් වෙළඳපළක සහභාගී වෙනකොට වෙළඳපළක් තුල අපි යම්කිසි ආකාරයක economic trade එකකට අපි පෙළඹෙන අවස්ථාවකදී, right? Any type of ආර්ථිකමය අපි කියමු ආර්ථිකමය ගනුදෙනුවක් කියලා, right? So the costs that we have to incur for that, we call them transaction cost, right? So transaction costs can be divided into three major categories according to our presentation here, right? So what are the three categories? First one is search and information costs, right? Search and information costs. That means cost for searching a digital service and determining its price and also its properties, right? Let's say you're searching for a mobile phone, right? The cost you have to incur to search for that mobile phone, right? And to determine its price, determine its properties, to compare between different versions, different models, right? The cost that you have to incur for that. Then there comes bargaining costs, right? What do you mean by bargaining costs? Bargaining costs are the collective costs for consumer and the provider to agree on the terms of the contract. This includes the price and delivery of the service. Now, if you are getting some sort of product delivered or some sort of service delivered, right? You have to come to certain agreements with your service provider, right? You have to agree on the terms of the contract, right? So price again අපි යම්කිසි සේවාදායකයෙක් එක්ක අපි යම්කිසි සේවාවක් හෝ භාණ්ඩයක් හෝ ලබා ගන්න කලින් අපි ඒගොල්ලොත් එක්ක යම්කිසි විදිහක එකඟතාවයකට එනවානේ. එතකොට අපි මේ ගනුදෙනුවට පිවිසෙන්නේ මොන කොන්දේසි යටතේද, right? මං විසින් දැරි ගනුදෙනුකාරයා මම නම් මං විසින් දැරිය යුතු පිරිවෙල මොකක්ද? එතකොට ඒකට මම ලබා ගන්නා භාණ්ඩේ හෝ සේවාවේ මිලත් ඇතුළත් වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම ඒ භාණ්ඩේ හෝ සේවාව deliver කරන්න, right? ඒක මා වෙත කියන්නේ ප්‍රවාහනය කරන්න හෝ එහෙම නැත්නම් අන්තර්ජාල මාධ්‍යයෙන් අපි කතා කරා. ඒතර මට ඒක disseminate කරන්න, මට deliver කරන්න ගන්න මුදලත් ඒකට ඇතුළත් වෙනවා. ඒතර මේ bargaining cost එකත් transaction cost එකේම කොටසක් කියලා අපි කියනවා. Then policing and enforcement cost. What is that? Cost of sticking to the agreement and taking appropriate action if the agreement is not upheld by either party. That means if someone is defaulting the agreement, conditions of the agreement, if someone is not abiding by the terms of the agreement, if the conditions of the agreement are not met, right, then there might be some sort of dispute, right? And also what is the cost that will be incurred at that point, and also to make this binding on both parties entering into the transaction, entering into the agreement, what is the cost you have to incur for that, right? මේ agreement එකට එළඹීම සඳහා යම්කිසි මුදලක් වැය කරන්න වෙනවා නම් ඔබට යම්කිසි පිරිවැයක් දරන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා නම් මේ agreements වලට එකඟ වෙන්න, then that is also a part of the transaction costs, right? So here one example we have provided the trading of physical goods using eBay. Then eBay platform එකක මේ වගේ transaction costs අපි දකිනවා, right? There's a සෙවුම් පිරිවැය කියලා අපි කියනවා නේද? Searching cost, information cost. අපි භාණ්ඩ සේවා search කරන්න ඒ වෙනුවෙන් දරන පිරිවැය. So අපි bargain කරනවානේ eBay වගේ platform එකක bidding system එකකින්නේ transactions settle වෙන්නේ නේද? Complete වෙන්නේ. එතකොට bargaining cost එකක් එතන ඇතුළත් වෙනවා. Then අපේ supplier සහ අපි අතර යම්කිසි agreement එකකට අපි එන අවස්ථා තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, right? Then ඒ වෙනුවෙන් අපිට දරන්න වෙන පිරිවැය. So in digital economy, so this is a special feature that we talk about, this transaction cost, right? But also in comparison to industrial economy, we say that in a digital economy, these transaction costs can be greatly reduced, right? Greatly reduced. Now, in a physical setting, to search for a product or service, to buy, physically go visit to a store and see, to travel here and there. දැන් උදාහරණයක් වань laptop එකක් වගේ එකක් ගන්න යනවා කියලා හිතන්නකෝ. ඔයාට ඒ වෙනුවෙන් විශාල සෙවුම් පිරිවැයකුත් දරන්න වෙනවා. විශාල කියන එකෙන් මම අදහස් කරන්නේ සැලකිය යුතු සෙවුම් පිරිවැයක් දරන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා. මේ වගේ ඩිජිටල් මාකට් එකක් එක්ක කම්පෙයාර් කරලා බැලුවා නේද? ඒ වගේම තමයි ඔයා කේවල් කිරීම කරනවා, right? ඒ බාණ්ඩ සපයන එක්කෙනත් එක්ක ඔයාලා අතර යම් agreements තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. දැන් corporate agreement එකක් නම් හිතන්නකෝ office එකකට වගේ ගන්න laptops කියලා. එහෙනම් අනිවාර්යෙන් ඒගොල්ලන් agreement එකකට එනවානේ. Service providing වලට මොනවාද එන terms and conditions මොනවාද? එතකොට supplier ගේ පැත්තෙන් ඉෂ්ට වෙන්න ඕනේ කාරණා මොනවාද? buyer ගේ පැත්තේ තියෙන වගකීම් මොනවාද? එතකොට මුල් මාස කිහිපේ ඒගොල්ලන් සමහර විට free of charge කරලා දෙනවා වෙන්න පුළුවන් මුල් මාස කිහිපේ. ඊට පස්සේ ඉඳන් updates වලට දරන්න වෙන පිරිවැය මොනවද? software installations මොන හරි කරන්න වෙනවා නම් ඒක වෙනුවෙන් දරන්න වෙන පිරිවැය මොනවද? ඔය ආකාරයේ වශයෙන් ඔය හැමදේම transaction cost එකට ඇතුළත් වෙනවා. But let's say and also keep in mind even the time that you incur for this, that is also a part of the transaction cost. මේ වෙනුවෙන් ඔයා යම් කාලයක් වැය කරනවා නම්, right? ඒකත් ඇත්තටම මේ transaction cost එකේ part එක. නමුත් අපි කියනවා digital market එකකදී මේ transaction cost එක අපිට සැලකිය යුතු ප්‍රමාණයකින් අඩු කරගන්න පුළුවන්. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට if we consider the search and information cost itself, now there are websites that provide the facility for the users to easily compare between different service providers and come to a conclusion. If we take this example of mobile purchasing a mobile phone that I earlier took, then ideabeam.com, right? Ideabeam.lk, I think. Yes, Ideabeam in their website, right? If you log into their website, you will see they compare and show the differences between different service providers, their prices, the features of the model, right? Their locations and everything, right? Details are provided on one site itself. So it's very easy for you as a user, as a buyer, to visit this website and in one shot, very clearly, compare between these and to select what is appropriate for you, right? So likewise, transaction costs can be greatly reduced because of this existence of a digital economy. This digital goods and services make it even more easier. In a physical setting, if you have to physically visit a supplier, for instance, and to talk with them and come into agreement, in a digital setting, it's not like that, right? You don't have to incur that huge cost to contact them, right? And to go through all that hassle. Right. So that is about transaction costs in a digital economy. Then we talk about bundling. What is bundling? You may have also heard of this word before, probably in your marketing lectures, right? If you have learned about pricing and all that, you may have heard about bundling. Product bundling කියලා දෙයක් ඔයගොල්ලන් ඉගෙනගෙන ඇති කලින් modules වල. So bundling is essentially a strategy followed by business people to increase their sales, right? Sales increase කිරීම සඳහා තියෙන feature එකක් තමයි bundling කියලා කියන්නේ, right? So what happens here? Product or service bundling means to combine several products or services for sale as a single package. දැන් ඔයගොල්ලන් සුපර්මාකට් එකකට ගියාම අපි හිතමු ටූත් පේස්ට් එකක් එක සබන් කැටයක් දෙනවා. ඒකල එක බන්ඩල් කරලා ඒගොල්ලන් බන්ඩල් ප්‍රයිස් එකක් කියනවා. අර කතිරයක් දාලා පරණ මිල කපලා ඔයාලට වාසිය කියලා පෙන්නන්නේ නේද? ඔයගොල්ලන්ට වාසිය කියලා පෙන්නන මේ දෙකම එකවර ගන්නකොට මෙච්චරක් ගාණක් අඩු වෙනවා කියලා පෙන්නනවා. So that is bundling. ඒතර digital economy එකකත් මෙහෙම bundling වෙනවා. Right? Single package එකක් හරහා several products combine කරලා deliver කිරීමක් වෙනවා. So one example we have provided here, Microsoft Office 365 package subscription, right? So in the Office 365 package, then all at as undergraduates, you have access to Office 365 package, isn't it? So in this package, you find the several applications such as Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, then Outlook, Publisher, Access, all these things you find in one package, right? So that is an example for product bundling happening in the virtual context or in a digital economy, in a digital context, right? So I hope you are clear with the concept of transaction cost and also the concept of bundling.